Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, the Air Pollution Risk Management Program for Drinking Water and Wastewater Treatment Plant Superintendents and Operators. This webinar is part of our In Your Community webinar series, focusing on environmental issues at the local level. My name is Helen Miller with the Division of Environmental and Financial Assistance, and I will be moderating today's webinar. Our speaker today is Jeff Beatty with our Division of Air Pollution Control. We also have subject matter expert Sherry Swihart behind the scenes answering your questions. With that, I'm going to turn it over to our presenter, Jeff Beatty.
Hi, this is Jeff Beatty. I'm going to be giving the presentation here over the next 40 minutes or so. I oversee the RMP, or the Risk Management Plan Program, but the nuts and bolts and the subject matter expert definitely is Sherry Swihart, who is behind the scenes as indicated. So feel free to, if you have any questions in regards to any of this, kick your question through the question box as part of the application, and Sherry will be more than happy to give you the proper answer. So just to give you the RMP plan program, this is all part of the 112R under the Federal Clean Act. And basically, it's the chemical accident prevention provisions that pretty much require facilities that will fall under the reporting umbrella and requirements under this program that either produce, handle, process, distribute, or store certain chemicals to prepare as well as submit a risk management plan program to US EPA, of which that RMP plan that is submitted to US EPA then in turn gets forward and sent to Ohio. We'll get into that a little bit more as we move forward. But primarily the goal of this risk management plan program is basically to try to maintain a safe facility and to have that facility take steps to either prevent or reduce releases, as well as minimize any consequences that may result from an accidental release. Because again, we do have those, and those accidental releases do occur. If you are of any type of legal mind, you like doing legal research, the RMP program is codified in Ohio Revised Code, Chapter 3753. But if you even want to go even further, the RMP is codified under the federal rules as 40 CFR Part 68. So with that, with any type of presentation, where did this program come from under the RMP? Just very quickly, Union Carbide back in 1984 had a very, very significant release of methyl isocyanate gas. And it was over in Bhopal, India. And as you can see in this slide, about 3,800 plus deaths resulted from that. But if you look at this picture, right in the center of that picture, primarily is where the facility, the Union Carbide facility, was, and the surrounding aspects of that picture is all residential. So this particular chemical facility was built right in the middle of a residential area, and in addition, this release happened during the course of the sleeping night, of which it was in the summer. Well, I should say it was relatively warm weather over there for December, and a lot of people had their windows open. So when you had about 40 tons of toxic gas released into the nearby area, obviously there was significant death as well as harm to the health and the environment took place. So after the fact, they did a root cause. Obviously that was of significant importance. So they did a root cause study about why that particular incident occurred. And as you can see, a bunch of little bullet items: inferior safety controls due to the poor design, inexperienced workers, laid off workers, shortage of workers. The refrigeration to that methyl isocyanate tank was shut off to save money. Corroded pipes, so on and so forth. Lack of employee training. There was no preventative maintenance program whatsoever. So primarily the results of that root cause analysis in these bullet items, as indicated on this particular slide, led to the United States at the federal level coming up with the RMP, or the Risk Management Plan Program, to take those lessons learned so that they could try to put together some type of a regulatory program in place for facilities in order to try to prevent something like that from happening over here. And again, as I indicated, this is an accident prevention plan program. Again, it's not going to prevent anything from happening. We're hoping to minimize something from happening if it so takes place. But the goal is to maintain that safe facility and to take steps to prevent and reduce releases, as well as to minimize those consequences if there is an accidental release that does occur. One of the most important parts of the RMP program, or that Risk Management Plan Program, is to ensure that these facilities that have these RMP related chemicals, these processes, these amounts of those chemicals, that they basically look at it and they're using what they refer to as recognized and generally accepted good engineering practices. There's a lot of guidance, a lot of information that's out there from various types of American type societies, from the American National Standard Institute. If you're for the water and wastewater treatment plants, you have the Chlorine Institute that has a lot of information that you can use as guidance or information in order to help you basically work with your RMP program from various aspects to use as a tool to help you get to where you need to be under this particular program. So basically what happened back in, this all started again, that incident was in 1984. Congress enacted the Emergency Planning and Community Right to Know in 1986. The OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, they developed that Process Safety Management Plan Program in 1992. That Process Safety Management Program is basically it's a standard that has just an established set of about 13 management areas and procedures designed to help protect worker health and safety in the case of an accidental release. So you had the emergency planning coming in 1986. You had OSHA developing their process safety management for employee health and safety in 1992. And then you had the RMP program here that we're talking about. That came into effect, it was signed into law in 1990, but by the time all the dust settled, by the time they came out with rules and regulations, this and that, we're pretty much talking around June of 1996 is when RMP was first put on the books as a regulatory matter for facilities to see whether this applied to you or not. So beginning June 21st, 1999, that was the first established deadline date for subject facilities that were required to prepare and execute an RMP type program. What did that mean is they had to submit through US EPA's, what they refer to as the Central Data Exchange. The CDX, or that Central Data Exchange, is an application that is web-based. You can submit your RMP plan. That RMP plan basically it's more of an executive summary that a subject facility submits as an executive summary about their facilities prevention plan programs, what they're doing, what impacts them, what are they doing from an emergency response, hazard analysis, so on and so forth. And again, what that RMP plan does is it puts you on the radar screen that you are a facility subject to the RMP type program, and that you are going to be eventually audited or inspected so that we can ensure that you're moving forward with the RMP program. We'll get into that here in a little bit. But also, you under the RMP program, you have hazard assessments. You have to do a worst case as well as an alternative release scenario to see if you did have, say, chlorine or sulfur dioxide or ammonia. There is a computer program that will enable you to determine what the off-site distance is from where the release occurred to where the endpoint is for that release, to see if there's any public and or environmental receptors that could be impacted by that accidental release of that chlorine, that sulfur dioxide, or whatever RMP chemical it is. There's also going to be prevention program. How, how do you detect, prevent, and minimize these accidental releases as it pertains to that particular RMP process? Now, during the course of this gathering, you're going to hear me say document, document, document. When we come out in Ohio to do a RMP audit of a facility that's subject to the RMP program, we are going to be looking at documentation that encompasses this particular program. Again, we'll get all into that, but keep it in the back of your mind. Document, 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 organize, 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 as well as know where the information is being stored and located so that you can find it when an RMP auditor or an RMP inspector comes out and they want to see your documentation. To not only save you time, but also save us time from the time we're out there to the time we get to leave you. As well as if there's emergency response program that's sort of new to the coordinating requirements that we'll get into as well. So, as we continue, to see whether this program even applies to you from a facility, a water or a wastewater treatment plant. Under this program, you have specific lists. Most regulatory programs, whether you're dealing with this regulatory program or that, will have a list of chemicals. RMP is no different. Under RMP, we have 77 toxic substances that are identified by US EPA, as well as 63 flammables. This particular slide shows you the particular web addresses where you can just click, point, double click, and it will take you directly to those 77 toxic and or 66 flammables. Once you determine if you have one of those 77 toxics or 63 flammables, you have it in a process. Basically, it includes whether you store it, handle it, process, etc. In other words, if you have an RMP chemical and you have it on site, it's going to be in a process. And then you have to look at the amount that you have. Because the amount for those 77 toxic substances, they can differ from one toxic to another, anywhere from 500 pounds to 20,000 pounds. For flammables, it's all 10,000 pounds or more. But now for water and wastewater treatment plants, you're primarily looking at, most of it's going to be chlorine, of which the threshold or the quantity to be included is if you have over 2,500 pounds of chlorine, you're going to be subject to the RMP program, which means you're going to be one of our, in Ohio, we have about 400 reporting facilities in the state of Ohio under the RMP program. Primarily, we have about 40 or so, about 10%, 10 to 15% of our RMP reporting universe is either a water or wastewater treatment plant. We might have a few that have sulfur dioxide in 5,000 pounds or more, but the biggest one is the biggest RMP chemical that applies to this particular group or your particular sector, water and wastewater, is 2,500 pounds or more. So in other words, if you have more than 1 ton cylinder of chlorine on site, whether you're storing it or processing it, you may have 2 of those 1 ton cylinders in the production mode or in the processing mode, and you might have a couple others that are sitting over there in storage to be changed out once the chlorine from the ones that are in processing basically run on empty. So again, if you have more than 1 ton cylinder of chlorine and or over 2,500 pounds of chlorine total at your particular water or wastewater treatment plant, this program may apply to you or will apply to you. But keep in mind, you can also try to figure out through talking to your operators and using some administrative controls, there might be a way that you may not have to have all that chlorine on site, where you can keep it below, from a operational perspective, keep it below that 2,500 pounds so that this program doesn't apply to you. That is one benefit that you could use is, the less number of hazardous chemicals you have at the facility, the less chances of something happening occurring. Or you could switch over to sodium. Some have switched over to sodium hypochlorite and or using the UV to disinfect the water as well as the wastewater from the treatment perspective. So I guess it's time to take a poll question. Question number 1. What is the most common chemical found at a treatment plant is? 1, sodium hypochlorite, 2, ammonia, 3, chlorine, or 4, sulfur dioxide.
Okay, and I'm launching the poll, so please select one of those. Okay, and I'm sharing the results.
Well, based on the results, most of the attendees are correct at 77%, which would be the chlorine. That is correct. So after the first question, so we're going to say that you are one of my 40 plus at this point in time, water or wastewater treatment plant facility. And once you find out that you have one or more of the RMP chemicals, you have it in a process, and you have it over that threshold, you are going to be put into, depending on what your worst case scenario analysis is going to be, you're either going to be put in a program 1, a program 3, or a program 2. I can tell you that for program 1, basically that's the simplest program to be in, because you only have to deal with 3 items: management, hazard assessment, and emergency response plan. But we have none of our, and that's where basically you have an RMP chemical and you do the offsite consequence. It gets offsite to an area where there's absolutely no public and or environmental receptors. In other words, there's no people, no parts, no this or that. You'll be put in a program 1. All of the water and wastewater treatment plants that we have in the program thus far will fall into program 3. That means they have the RMP chemical, chlorine, or sulfur dioxide, or something on that order, where they have it in a process and they have it over the threshold. The reason why you're in program 3 is 1, your worst case scenario based with the chlorine will have a distance off-site that is going to generate or may generate the impact to any public and or environmental receptors, the public, people, parts, so on and so forth. And or the reason why you're going to be put in program 3 is most, if not all, water and or wastewater treatment plants will fall under the OSHA process safety management, that PSM standard that we talked about just very briefly at the beginning. But if you are a state publicly owned and or operated, you fall under something called the Public Employees Risk Reduction Program, which basically is Ohio's version of the OSHA process safety management. So, like I said, if you're a water or wastewater treatment plant, most likely you're going to fall under program 3. And then for program 2, that's just a catch. That's just a catch program. If you're not put in program 1, you're not put in program 3. You're put in program 2. But we're going to go through very simply, very quickly, all the program 3 elements. Oh, before we do that, let's talk about a general duty clause, because I know there's a lot more water and wastewater treatment plants that are probably on this call that this program might not even reach out and touch. But you should basically be aware of the general duty clause. There is something called a general duty clause that was put in under the 112R CAA. Basically, what this general duty clause says is you have a responsibility. Even though, say, the RMP program doesn't apply to you, you still have an obligation, because you may have the RMP chemical, you may have it in a process, but you have below the quantity that would trigger you to have to go through all the elements of this. There still is a responsibility for that particular facility to ensure that those chemicals are being managed safely. So keep in mind that, and that general duty clause is just make sure or be aware of those relevant industry standards, industry codes, industry practices. Be aware of those unique circumstances in regards to your facility and that particular process or processes. Be aware of any accidents and other incidents that may occur within your facility or within that industry. because if something does happen and you cannot demonstrate that you are basically ensuring that you have these chemicals and you are managing these chemicals or these toxic substances, they want to make sure that you're managing those in a reasonable fashion under industry codes and standards and practices. Because if not, and something happens at your facility and either OSHA or US EPA comes in, they could tag you under this general duty clause or failing to adhere to the general duty clause. Okay, now the RMP submission. RMP only comes around once every 5 years. So whenever you are first subject to the RMP program, you have what they call an anniversary date, that first year date. And then every 5 years, you have to submit that RMP plan or that RMP executive summary, as I refer to it as, every 5 years thereafter, unless you have a change, such as, if you have a change in emergency contact information, you have to make that change, or you have to go into that RMP and do that within a month. If you have an RMP reportable accident or a release, you have to update that RMP plan within 6 months, so on and so forth. But again, keep in mind, that's the one difficult thing about the RMP program is you submit once, say this year, and then technically you may not have to resubmit for another 5 years. But you will receive something from US EPA that says, by the way, you reported 5 years ago, heads up, on the horizon is your 5-year anniversary. So you might want to start taking some actions to get yourselves reorganized on the resubmittal of your RMP plan. Again, we talked about US EPA has everything is web-based with this particular program, at least from that RMP submission or that RMP executive plan that I make reference to. It's called the CDX, Central Data Exchange. And within that CDX, you're going to have to get yourself not only as a preparer, but somebody's going to have to certify it. So you have to get that all formally approved when you're setting yourself up within that federal CDX or Central Data Exchange system. And then once you have that happen, then you can go in when it's time to do your RMP submittal. You go into an application called RMP *eSubmit. There's the website for it. And then you can just basically just add all your information in and submit it electronically. It goes straight to US EPA, and US EPA then in turn provides that information to the state of Ohio. Simple and easy. So again, we're in program 3, water wastewater treatment plants. Program 3, just you pretty much fall under either OSHA or that Public Employee Risk Reduction Program. You have an RMP chemical, you exceed the threshold, it's in a process. The first element, and again, these all pretty much fall under the OSHA process safety management. So in other words, if you're already doing something under that OSHA process safety management, you're pretty much going to be doing all this information, or you're going to be addressing this information already. Because when the RMP program was being established, they just pretty much wanted to just mirror it with the OSHA. They didn't want to really add any more additional rules and regulations to the reporting facilities nonetheless. So under management, that's just a simple one. That's just where basically you have it documented, the management structure, as well as from the top management at your water or wastewater treatment plant, down through the chain of command, down to those individual operators that deal with that particular chlorine process or that sulfur dioxide process. So again, it's just nothing more than a process table of organization or table of management, names, response titles, responsibilities. And again, document. The next is that hazard assessment. When you talk about a hazard assessment, you're talking about a worst case scenario. This is whereby we want to try to figure out, okay, you have an RMP chemical that's in the process. We want to put it through a worst case release scenario to see what that greatest distance to that endpoint, if you do have an accidental spill or an accidental release. There is something called the RMP *COM. That is an application that you can also get off US EPA's website or the Ohio EPA's website. That will establish what that distance to that endpoint is if you do have a worst case scenario. Basically, also keep in mind, we need to know, or you as a facility need to know what your residential population is within the radius of that distance to the endpoint. You can get that from your census, MARPLOT, something on that order. but know where those public environmental receptors are from your facility's property boundaries. So that RMP asterisk that RMP asterisk com program. Again, this is a very simple, easy application or tool that US EPA put together. Basically, you just bring it up on your computer. You just click begin down at the bottom of that screen. It will bring you up to a chemical list. You just scroll. This is just nothing more than a list of all those 77 toxic chemicals and 66 flammables. All you have to do is just scroll down, pick your chemical that you have, and then just click on it. And then it's going to populate here. And then you just have and then you just click on worst case scenario. What's the physical state of that chemical? Is it liquefied by refrigeration, or is it liquid under pressure? What's the quantity that you have? What's the surrounding terrain look like from an urban and or rural? And then all it is just click point, and then submit at the bottom. And then it's going to basically give you an estimated endpoint. And for this particular calculation, the estimated distance to the toxic endpoint from your facility or from that chemical to how far it's going to go before it dissipates, where the impact of that community, whether it's the public and or environmental receptors. For this particular case for chlorine, at the amount that we plugged in, looks like it's 1.3 miles. So if you have any public and or environmental receptors within 1.3 miles, you're going to be put in program 3, which means you have all those 13 elements to handle. So again, make sure you keep a copy of this, because when we in Ohio come out to do an audit or an inspection at your facility under RMP, one of the first things they're going to ask you is they want to see that worst case scenario documentation. So, once you do it, make a copy of it and put it in a 3-ring binder or however you choose to store it, and make sure not only you and or multiple people know where it can be found and or located. Then there's a hazard assessment. Basically, again, more documentation that you need to have on site. Again, we just talked about, keep that asterisk com, print it out, know where it is, know what your population data is, because again, they're going to want to look at that. The next item under the program 3 is process safety information. Again, for chlorine, sulfur dioxide, whatever, make sure you have an updated MSDS, or now I think it's called SDS, safety data sheet for that chemical. Make sure it's available, because again, it's also going to be available under OSHA. So safety data sheet for that chemical. All technology and or equipment that you're dealing with, make sure you have technology and those diagrams all organized, updated. Know what the safe upper and lower limits of the equipment in the process is. And again, it's all documentation at this point. Just make sure you know where it is, keep it organized, keep it printed, keep it documented. Because again, when we come out and do an audit, we're going to ask for the backflow diagram to look at. We're going to want to know what the safe upper and lower limits are. Where is that? Prove it to us. Show us what it is. Any design codes or standards. Again, just keep them organized as part of this program. Process hazard analysis is another component to this particular program. It's required every 5 years, as well as the very last one. When you deal, and it's a lot of what if type analysis. What if this happens? What if that happens regarding this chlorine at this amount? And there's various checklists, or at the bottom there, what if analysis. There's hazard and operability studies, fault tree analysis, to name a few, recommendations to improve safety, so on and so forth. Keep in mind, I know when you look at process hazard analysis, whether it's on US EPA's website or Ohio EPA's website, there are these checklists to help you handle your process hazard analysis part of the prevention program. Or just go to that Chlorine Institute. I'm sure they probably have some other items that can help you with that process hazard analysis. But again, once you do that process hazard analysis, however you choose to do it, make sure that it's documented so that it can be reviewed. Operating procedures. Operating procedures are a big one that we look at. We want to make sure that these operating procedures, basically, these are all written steps, anywhere from offloading containers to switching containers to process startup to shutdown, so on and so forth. And these operating procedures need to be certified annually. And they should also make sure that these are readily available to your operators. Also, get your operators involved in putting together these operating procedures, because those are the guys and gals that are out there dealing with that particular process day in and day out. So get them involved. But again, those operating procedures need to be certified annually. Utilize Chlorine Institute. They could probably help provide you some operating basic language if you haven't already done so. So let's take another poll. How often are operating procedures required to be certified? Never. As needed. Number 3, every 3 years. Or 4, annually.
Hey, and I'm sharing the results, Jeff.
Okay, we're getting the majority again have come through at 64%. The operating procedures, regardless of which one of the many operating procedures a water or wastewater treatment should have for that process, they need to be certified annually. And again, when we come out to do an audit, when we come out to do an inspection, we're going to want to look at those operating procedures to make sure that they're updated and certified. Thank you. Now, the next is training. Make sure you are training any new operator in regards to that particular process for chlorine or for whatever RMP chemical you have. Your refresher training is training has to be conducted every 3 years or whenever there is a change in the operating procedures, such as if you are changing from liquid to a gas feed. That's considered to be a process change, which means you may have to change your operating procedures, which then in turn you would have to basically do an initial updating or initial training for that new operating procedure to all the operators. And again, maintain the documentation. So again, document, make it available for when we come out and do that audit or do that inspection so that we can see that you're addressing your training needs for those operators and those operating procedures. Mechanical integrity. Oh, I guess we're going to do another quick poll. Training for operators involved with the RMP cover is required how often? Training for operators involved with all these RMP covered processes is required how often for these operating procedures?
Okay, I'm launching a poll. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say 1, minimum every 3 years, B, never, or C, minimum every 5 years.
And I'm sharing the results.
And definitely the results are getting much better. People are starting to listen a little bit better to Casey Kasem here on the webinar, but minimum of every 3 years. That is correct. So good job. Let's continue. Now the other part, now we have mechanical integrity. Again, written programs required for mechanical integrity as it pertains to that particular chlorine process or sulfur dioxide process. So, and that basically is, again, document any inspections and or testing to the piping, to the relief valves, to the vaporizers, to the chlorinators, because again, under accepted standards for your particular industry, for mechanical integrity, those pipes, those relief valves, those chlorinators, I'm sure there are specifications and documentations or recommended manufacturing of inspection dates, as well as testing of those. Make sure those tests are documented, make sure the deficiencies are documented, as well as training for the employees in mechanical integrity. Mechanical integrity, again, frequencies is get a hold of your Chlorine Institute, operations and maintenance manuals for equipment, or prior operating experience will tell you what those frequencies of those inspections are. And again, make sure you have dates, make sure you have the deficiencies, if there are any, documented, as well as if there are deficiencies, how those deficiencies are going to be corrected. You have management of change and pre-startup review, another major category under Program 3. Management of change is if you are basically, if you are switching from gas to a liquid, or you're adding a scrubber or replacing a chlorinator or whatnot, you need to have what they refer to as a management of change document. And again, it's just more of a procedure of how that change, going from gas to liquid, adding that scrubber, what's the procedures to manage those modifications? Again, have it documented from beginning to end. And again, there's a lot of guidance document, whether it's on RMP and or our particular agencies, of how to go about what type of management of change documentation they're going to be looking for. Pre-startup review. You need to have some procedures in place if you are going to be pre-starting up something. What are those procedures to ensure that those modifications to that process are indeed safe, and make sure you train those appropriate employees for that, basically that pre-startup or that startup when it comes time to do that. You got compliance audit and incident investigations. Compliance audit. Under RMP, if you are one of those 400 plus reporting RMP facilities in Ohio, you just make sure you do an RMP compliance audit every 3 years to make sure that you are moving forward and you are addressing all of these elements that we're talking about under this Program 3 presentation. If you do have an incident, make sure you investigate that incident and or near misses, and make sure that you ensure at least one person that has knowledge of that process. Or you can use an independent person to do that incident investigation. But if you do have that incident involving that RMP chemical, you do have a RMP obligation, regulatory obligation, to investigate the root cause of that particular and coming up with recommendations to try to hope that does not happen again, or if it does, to minimize any effects of such incident. Employee participation, hot work permit, and contractors. Basically, again, get your employees participating in these written plans, because those are the men and the women that are out there dealing with that chemical, dealing with that process. So anything involved with the RMP program elements, get them involved. If you do have some hot work permit, welding on any process equipment, you have some hot work permit, make sure that that's all properly documented, so that when we come out and do that audit or do that inspection, if it's been identified that some work has been done, they're going to ask for that hot work permit information documentation. So again, keep it organized, keep it documented, keep it all together so that everybody knows where it is when we come out. If you have contractors coming out on or around your facility or all around that process, make sure that they are aware of the safety program that you may have. Provide them a copy with the safety data sheets or that emergency action plan that you do have in place at your facility, so that the contractors are aware of what to do if something does indeed occur while they're on your premises. An emergency response plan. The emergency response plan for RMP reporting facilities. Now, basically, here, this is a relatively new element dating back, I'll start in like 2019. But there is multiple year phase-in for the different elements. But primarily, if you're an RMP reporting facility, you're going to have to start addressing your coordination with your local emergency responders. You're eventually going to be have to conduct a tabletop and or field exercise with these local emergency responders, so on and so forth. If you are a non-responding agency, in other words, if something happens, you do not respond accordingly, or you are not responding to the incident, you have to make a few phone calls to the local emergency responders. You have to do an annual notification drill. That's pretty much where you have an emergency contact listing of information, You just need to make sure that it's accurate and up to date, as well as there's an annual coordination with the county's local LEPC or local emergency planning committee and the fire departments, and that's effective now, and it must be documented. So in other words, when you talk about it, annual coordination, what does annual coordination mean? Not really sure, other than the fact you need to just reach out and identify yourself as an RMP reporting facility to an LEPC and the fire departments. Make sure you have it documented. Attend an LEPC meeting, invite them onto your facility for a walkthrough, so on and so forth. I guess that's annual coordination. Eventually, you're going to be doing tabletop exercises and field exercises. Tabletop exercises won't kick in until like November 2026. And then the field exercises, we're still waiting to hear back from US EPA through the federal regulations to see what field exercise and what's going to constitute those, as well as what dates are going to be required to implement the field exercises between the local responders and the RMP facility. Public meetings, if you do have an incident that does have some offsite impacts within 60 days, under the RMP requirements, you are to have a public meeting in order to discuss that RMP chemical, to discuss that RMP incident release, how it was dealt with, so on and so forth. Let's see. Now, for Ohio EPA, we have an RMP delegated program here in Ohio. We received it January 2020. What does that mean? That means Ohio, we basically administer the RMP program for the state of Ohio. We develop rules, we do audits, we do inspections. We do have a fee schedule in place that pretty much just supports the cost of running the program. We can do enforcement, but we prefer to deal with everything at the, dealing with just getting the RMP and getting that facility in compliance. We have a lot of guidance, we can provide training. But primarily, the one nice thing about delegation is, in Ohio, we average probably about 80 to 90 RMP audits during the course of a calendar year. But if you were any of the other states in Region 5, which is under US EPA's oversight, those states might get 3 or 4, if that. So Ohio EPA, we definitely are going out and doing audits, doing inspections. And again, we reach out and get about 80 to 90 a year. We try to come out and see the RMP facility about once every 5 years. We will give you a week or two notice that we're going to come out so that you can get your documentation in order. And usually these audits last around 2 to 4 hours, depending on if everything's clicking from a documentation review and everybody and the facility knows where everything is and has it waiting for us when we get there. We will send out a checklist of what we're going to be looking for. And then afterwards, we'll review any violation or violations that you might have. If you do have some violations, you'll receive a notice of violation, which gives you basically about another 30 days or so to try to resolve that violation or those violations. We'll come out and do a follow-up audit. Or if everything looks good, you'll get a letter of compliance from the program, and you will not see us probably for another 5 years. So that's the encouragement. Get a letter of compliance, you won't see us for another 5 years. Common violations, incomplete hazard analysis. And again, it's all documentation or not having documentation or having incomplete documentation. I won't go through each of those. Everybody can read those. But again, from no refresher training to lack of process hazard analysis revalidations to no preventative maintenance, no documentation for correcting deficiencies on that mechanical integrity testing, so on and so forth. Not implementing a contractor program. You may be implementing a contractor program, but if we come out there, do that audit and do that inspection, and there's no documentation, we're just going to have to assume that you're not implementing it. So again, that's why that's why I keep going back. Document, 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 organize, 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 and keep all these documentations at a central location at that facility. Again, under Ohio EPA, there's a lot of guidance either at US EPA or Ohio EPA's website. Go to the Chlorine Institute for guidance. Go to the American Water Works Association. They have RMP guidance. It's out there if you want it. But again, we also have, whether it's the guidance online or we have technical staff here, even though there's only about 1.5 to 2 people dealing with the RMP audits and inspections. But if you have any questions, feel free to give them a call or send them an email. Now, before we have questions, I did not put, if you have any follow-up or any questions in regards to RMP, I'm going to give you our RMP email that we have put together just to receive any documentations or any questions that you might have. Our program, or the RMP program email address, is rmp@epa.ohio.gov. And I apologize for not putting that on a slide. But again, it's rmp@epa.ohio.gov. And that concludes the RMP presentation to the water and wastewater group in the state of Ohio.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. I'd also like to remind people that you can obtain a copy of the PowerPoint presentation. It's a PDF document. If you click on your document icon on your attendee interface, so you'll be able to access those links that Jeff shared with you. So we did have some questions come in. Our first question is, how long does a treatment plant have to deregister from the program after removing a regulated substance?
They would have 6 months to remove that, to get out of the CDX.
Okay. Our next question is, if the treatment plant has a RMP reportable release that affects off-site receptors, when is the public meeting required?
They would have no longer than 60 days.
Okay. Another question is, what are other methods that may be used to calculate the distance to the endpoint?
The RMP comp is the most common, but you can also use the Aloha from the Cameo suite, or American Water Works Association has calculations and some guidance, or the US EPA puts together some tables for that.
Okay, the next question is, how are the frequency and types of inspections or tests determined for treatment plants?
You can go, the Chlorine Institute, they have a lot of documentation that will explain what you need to do. The best place is actually your equipment manuals, your O&M manuals. They will tell you what needs to be done and how often. And you can also look at the previous industrial experience in your sector.
Okay, where can treatment plants find guidance on the RMP regulations?
US EPA has put a lot of guidance on their RMP website. Ohio EPA has put specific guidance for wastewater and water treatment plants on our website. And then again, the Chlorine Institute has guidance as well.
Okay, what are some examples of RMP covered equipment for a chlorination process?
Your storage of your cylinders, the storage area, your chlorinators, your vaporizers. Basically, the process ends when the chlorine is ejected. So it would be everything up into that point, including like your chlorine.
Okay. And how could a water treatment plant be a program level 1?
We haven't had any, but if your worst case scenario did not reach any public receptors, which maybe it would happen if you own a lot of land or something, because most of it goes 1.3 miles, or you have had no RMP reportable releases.
Okay, our next question is, if a water treatment plant's expanding, when should an RMP be submitted?
You should have a RMP in place via the CDX no later than when that chemical exceeds the threshold at your facility.
Okay, and when should a new employee receive training on the operating procedures?
The new employee should always be trained prior to even operating the process on any procedures that they'll be involved with.
Okay, and this will be our last question before we wrap up. How long should PHAs and maintenance records be maintained?
The PHAs and maintenance records are required to be for the life of the process. Although Ohio EPA, we usually look at since the last inspection. So, but you should still keep those, either, archive them or something like that.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Jeff, for the great presentation, and Sherry for your subject matter expertise. And thank you to everyone for attending today's webinar. We'd also like to bring your attention to our Encouraging Environmental Excellence Award program, which recognizes entities for exceptional achievements in environmental stewardship. Is your organization going beyond to reduce your environmental impact? Examples can include lighting retrofits, reducing water energy use, recycling efforts, process improvements. Is your community implementing sustainable measures to reduce their environmental impact? Examples can include community gardening, green roofs, and smart transportation. Many of us have children in school. Is your K-12 student implementing student-led sustainable activities at their school? Things like recycling, water bottle refilling stations, anti-idling policies for buses, and composting. This program has different levels of recognition for organizations, communities, and schools. Please go to our website on the slide to learn more about this program. Before we end for the day, please check out our upcoming sessions. On August 9th, we have assistance and resources from Ohio EPA and OSHA's on-site consultation program. This session will cover free and confidential services offered through Ohio EPA and OSHA to help businesses navigate complex environmental and health and safety regulations. Please attend this session to learn more about the resources available and how they can help you. On August 16th, we have environmental regulations of businesses in your community. Ohio EPA regulates sources of air pollution, waste handling, wastewater and stormwater discharges, and more. This webinar will provide an overview of the environmental regulations affecting both large and small businesses in your community and explain Ohio EPA's permitting, inspection, and enforcement procedures. To register for these upcoming webinars, please check out our new agency event calendar. On our next slide, the events calendar is on our main web page, and the link is also on our web page footer at the bottom of each web page. To receive notifications of upcoming webinars, go to our Ohio EPA Customer Support Center. You can create an account, then go to the option Subscribe to Updates, then select the subscription option All Trainings, Webinars, and Conferences. Go to the link on the slide, and the Customer Support Center link is also on the bottom footer of every one of our web pages. And if you miss past webinars, you can also go to our DEFA web page at the link on the slide. Once you're on our DEFA web page, click on the word training on the left-hand menu column. Here you'll find recordings of training you may have missed. You can also go to our agency YouTube channel to view recorded webinars. We'll post the recording of this webinar on our YouTube channel. It usually posts within a week of the webinar. We also post a PDF copy of the PowerPoint slides with the recording. And the YouTube channel link can be found on the bottom of each of our web pages on the footer, and the YouTube icon is right next to the Twitter icon on the bottom right side. With that, we will end today's webinar. Thank you for joining us, and have a great day.